It's really good, and it's got like a really good blueberry flavor. I'm impressed. Cutting out the lemon zest totally made this recipe work. Welcome back. Thank you so much for joining me. If you're new here, I'm Kathryn, the Aerogarden Homesteader, and today I am going to be making a blueberry pie. I'm working off of my grandmother's recipe, which, I'm still trying to recreate because, my goodness, it was good. And I know she was using wild blueberries, but I do have her actual recipe, not handwritten. I mean, it was just emailed to me by my mom, but I don't think she followed this recipe, because I made that recipe and I'll tell you, it had way too much lemon in it. The lemon zest and I think it was the lemon zest, it was way overpowering. My goodness, it was so lemony, like it was almost inedible. I don't think she was using lemon zest at all because she lived out in the country. There really was not much near where she lived, and I think that the local co-op that they shopped at, I don't even think they had lemons. It was boony land out there. So I don't think the lemons were in there at all. I am not putting in any lemon. I might put in a tiny bit of bottled lemon juice, but not as much as it calls for, just to give it that, a little bit of acidity will give it a little bit of brightness, but I don't think the amount that the recipe called for, I don't think she was using that. Okay, so let me see. It calls for a 1/4 teaspoon of nutmeg. I do believe she might have put nutmeg in. That's something that you can get. But I don't think she was putting in lemon juice. And I mean, I tasted it and I was just like, I was so disappointed after I ate it, because it was like, I was so hopeful. It was her recipe and I followed it, and yeah, it didn't work. So I am working with frozen blueberries. They were just some blueberries I had in the fridge before we left for a trip, and so I just ended up chucking them in the freezer. So they have to get used at some point, and we like smoothies, but we don't put blueberries in our smoothies, so I have no idea how they're going to get used. So I feel like this is probably the best way to get them used. Okay, I put in 3/4 cup of sugar, a 1/4 teaspoon of nutmeg, 4 cups of blueberries. It's actually slightly more than 4 cups, but you know what? I'm not going to leave like a tiny amount in the bag. So I'm just going to use it all up. It's going to be slightly more full than usual. I'm going to put in 2 tablespoons of flour. You can use other thickening agents for this if you are gluten intolerant, or you don't want to put flour in, because it does calls for quick cooking tapioca, which she may or may not have used. I don't know. Back then that was more popular than I think it is now. I certainly don't keep it in my house, but cornstarch is 1:1. Flour is actually 1:1. So if you wanted to put in 3 tablespoons of flour or 3 tablespoons of cornstarch, or that works too. Then it calls for, okay, I gotta put salt in. And then, like I said, I will probably put in a tiny amount of bottled lemon juice, because it's not going to be extremely citrusy. It's not going to have that really strong lemon flavor like the zest will, but I do think it's going to help sort of bring a brightness with the acidity. Okay. I'll put in 1 tablespoon of that. It does call for 1.5 tablespoons, so if you would like to have that lemon juice punch, you go right ahead, but I'll tell you, I did not like it at all. It did call for 1 tablespoon of grated lemon zest. Yeah, that I think pushed it over the top. And then, an ingredient that she didn't have on her thing is almond extract. I tried that when I did the other one, and I thought it was nice, but it was very understated. Like the lemon juice just totally overpowered it. So I'm trying it again. I don't think it's an ingredient she put in, but okay, I need a spoon to stir that with. Okay, now since my berries are frozen, they are obviously not going to juice up very much right now, and you do want to let this sit for a good 10 minutes, 10 to 15 minutes, to allow it to juice up a little bit, because you want it to sort of mingle with the flour and cornstarch to start thickening. But they're frozen, so I am going to let this sit for a while longer and see how it goes. I was able to put in a few blueberries from my blueberry bush, which was kind of nice. We did have some produced from our earlier bush, the Duke, which is done now, and now we've got some of the, I think it's high crop or blue crop or something that's producing now. So they're not as big as the Duke bush, so they're not going to produce quite as much. But I did mix a couple in here, so it's kind of nice that I have a few blueberries from my own plants. Okay, like I said, I am going to let this sit and thaw and juice up. It's still early enough in the day that I can get the pie made and still have time to bake it. I have my pre-made lard crust that I love using for just about everything. So this is from the freezer, hard as a rock. It also needs to thaw, so I'm going to try to let just all of this happen at once, and then hopefully I can roll out the crust, put this in, sit it in the fridge for about half an hour to an hour to sort of chill up again, and then bake it off. But I will take you through all of the steps so you can see how they go. Hopefully this one turns out a lot better than the last one. My goodness. It has been a little over an hour. The blueberries are still cold, but they have thawed and they are starting to create some juice. So this is what it looks like. This is pretty much what I'm looking for. So the sugar has not completely dissolved, but it is, you know, forming juice. So this is where we're going to leave it. And I am going to, it smells really good, it smells like blueberries. I'm going to start rolling out my crust. Now my crust has had enough time to thaw mostly. It's a little bit frozen-ish in the center. Some of that's probably the lard just being firm. Now I have made blueberry pie in the past, trying to follow my grandmother's recipe, which it was a really good pie, but it was missing something. And I'm trying again because, you know, at some point I'm going to have a chance to get wild blueberries, and I want to try to find the recipe that will work so that when I have the wild blueberries, I can just whip up some pie. I know that store-bought blueberries are not going to be quite the same as wild, but I can at least experiment with cheaper blueberries because, you know, it's a labor of love to go and pick wild blueberries, so I want to make sure that I have a tried and true recipe. I did do some canned blueberry pie filling, and that does have a different taste as well. I didn't put in the nutmeg because I didn't have it, so that's easy enough to add in after the fact. But it does use the cook type gel to keep it thick, and the filling is just a little different. So it's got a little bit of a different texture to it, and it's a good pie filling, but it's not quite what I'm looking for. So I am just experimenting with fresh because I can. And, you know, it's always nice to have blueberry pie filling that you could use for other things. So it's nice to have some in the jar for other uses. I have been looking at probably making some, they're like cookie bars, but it's got like jam or pie filling as a filling in it, and they look really good. So I want to try making some of those because I think those would be really nice to use with homemade pie filling. We are in another heat wave again. Felt like the cool down between heat waves was definitely not long enough. So I will be baking this outside, and I'm actually making sourdough bread, and I have been baking that outside as well. So I use the turkey roaster to bake bread. I can fit my Dutch oven in there nicely, so if I want to make boules, I can use the Dutch oven. If I want to just make a loaf, I can also put the loaf pan in with the foil on top. It works really well. And then for the pies, I've been using a toaster oven, which has been working really well as well. It's a little bit delicate. I must have gotten it a little bit on the thin side. First time I ever made pie crust, I made the mistake of not easing it in, and I just kind of smashed it in and stretched it, and it shrunk to like a third of its size. It wasn't funny at the time, but it's pretty funny to look back on it now. But yeah, definitely needs to be eased into place and not stretched. It's funny, the first time I made tortillas, they tasted like pie because I didn't knead them for long enough. So everything is just a learning process. And normally what I do is I roll out my top crust and then I fill it. That way the filling isn't sitting in for too long before I get it in the fridge. I don't know that it really makes that much of a difference, but I do like to put it in the fridge to give it, the pie crust, a little bit of a chance to firm up again, and then I bake it off. Okay, and in it goes. Don't let me forget to put the butter on it. I always seem to want to forget that. Alright, I had to dig around and find my butter a little bit, but here we go. Goes for about half a tablespoon of butter, just to be dotted on top. My butter is frozen, so hopefully it will cut up nicely. This is probably going to be closer to a tablespoon because, honestly, it's hard to measure it from the stick. Okay. I just want to just sort of dot that on top. There we go. Now that I'm all greasy. Okay, so I got a little bit of a crack there, but that's okay. My method of operating is I like to get this all assembled, and then I like to put it in the fridge for like an hour or so at least, and let it continue chilling before I sort of dock the holes in and put it in the oven. So the recipe called for baking it in a hot oven, so preheating to 450 and then doing 10 minutes, then turning it down for half an hour. That didn't really work for me last time, so I'll probably just put it in around 370 to 400 and just do the full time that way. And I like to put on a little crust cover just to protect the crust a little bit. That just works best for me. So if you have sort of a method you like to use when you are making pie that works well for you, go right ahead. I don't think it makes any difference whatsoever to the end product. As long as it comes out cooked and tastes good, it should not matter. It does sometimes help to put a little bit of water between the layers of the top crust and the bottom crust. I always forget, so I always get a little bit of separation. Doesn't matter, it all tastes the same. So do whatever you need to do. So I like to just sort of flatten the crust down a little bit because then it doesn't stick up quite so much and get quite so dark. And it all kind of cooks at the same pace. So I will get this covered up with the saran wrap that I had the dough stored in. Doesn't stick very well, but it sticks good enough to just be in the fridge for about an hour, and then I will get this cooked probably about 400 for almost an hour. I leave the crust cover on until like the last 10 to 15 minutes of baking, and that helps sort of make it all golden and uniform, all at the same, you know, to look all the same color. So I will show you what it looks like when it's done, and I will let you know how it tastes. This is how the blueberry pie turned out. It has a really nice thick filling. It is a little soupy when it comes out hot from the oven. I'll be honest, I cut it a little bit on the early side, but I couldn't wait to try it. It tasted so good fresh from the oven. I was actually a little worried that it wouldn't taste quite as good today after it had cooled off, but oh, it still tasted so good. This would be really good with wild blueberries. One of these days, I will get my hands on wild blueberries and I will do this again, but even just using some store-bought blueberries, this turned out so good. I don't know if it was the nutmeg or the almond extract or the combination of both of them, but it's really good, and it's got like a really good blueberry flavor. I'm impressed. Cutting out the lemon zest totally made this recipe work, which is surprising because normally lemon zest adds to things, and it actually detracted from this recipe the first time I did it. So this is a really good recipe. I hope you give it a try. I will have some videos up at the end that you might also enjoy, and I will see you next time on the Aerogarden Homestead.